My Nerd World.
Where's the revolution? Come on, people, you're letting me down. Where's the revolution? Come on, people, you're letting me down.
And welcome, Depeche Mode fans. It is episode number 10, a little late, my apologies. I'll explain, of Depeche Mode, the podcast. I'm your host, John Justice, and first off, thanks to everybody who's reached out recently, wondering what happened to the to the podcast. The intention was always to do either a weekly or bi-weekly, and it wasn't until just now that I realized that I'm about 2 weeks off. And again, thank you to those who have who've tweeted, who've also emailed, asking what happened to the podcast. It means so much that you guys have been enjoying it. And my apologies, because I know how frustrating it is for me when there's a podcast that I really like and they don't put an episode out. I don't have a good doing that thing with my fingers excuse for you. I could give you the lame sort of excuse, and that is, well, the band took a break after performing their warm-up shows and are only now getting back into promotion of Spirit, so I just decided to take a break along with them. But that would honestly be a lie. The truth of the matter is that I have my work. I'm a talk show host as my full-time job. Okay, so Monday through Friday. And then, I have my family, my wife of 17 years this year, and then my two boys, 14 and 10 years old. So these are the big important things. Family before my job, obviously. My God, right? Okay. That being said, my other loves, apart from Depeche Mode, are I'm a massive Star Wars fan. For those that follow the podcasts, the My Nerd World podcast, and I'm also a big NASCAR Dale Jr. fan. Okay, so. Part of the reason is that after the last podcast on April 1st, I had planned on taking a week's break, and I had kind of forgotten mentally that the big Star Wars convention, Star Wars Celebration, was going to be taking place last weekend, and then along with that was the new trailer for The Last Jedi, the teaser trailer. And so my fandom kind of got all consumed by Star Wars. The funny thing about that is that I didn't even realize it until I sat down to record the podcast today, that Depeche Mode had still been sitting there in the middle of all of it, and I'll explain here in just a minute. So my fandom had really been consumed by all things Star Wars. I'd recorded a couple Star Wars podcasts and just had been following all the news coming out of Celebration last weekend, and so my head was in a galaxy far, far away and not necessarily in the world we live in and life in general. And so that was the big reason why I didn't end up doing a podcast. I got really, really wrapped up, not just in work, but in following the movie news that I just hadn't sat down to record a new one. I had intended to this week all along, and over the course of the past few days, I've been getting a smattering of texts and emails from you saying, dude, where's the podcast? I missed it. And I was like, so I'm so glad that I was planning on doing it anyways, and my apologies for it taking so long. On the podcast, on the show this week, I do want to break down a bit of what we have. I have some audio to share with you. The opening band for U.S. and Canada, Warpaint. For those that haven't heard Warpaint, I have a sampling of their music. Plus, Depeche Mode popped up in a trailer for a new Charlize Theron movie that we'll get into, which kind of threw me off quite a bit when I saw the trailer. Worked really well, but I have the audio for you. It's a mix between Depeche and Kanye West for those that haven't heard. Also, I have a really good article, time permitting, on the podcast this week out of the BBC that I want to share with you. I was surprised. It was 8 stories about the band you may have never heard of before, and all but I think a few of them were stories that I hadn't heard before, which really surprised me because I have several different, I guess, biography discs. They're kind of bootlegs, but they were these bootleg biography discs that people have put together. I've read most of the if not all, the books about Depeche Mode. And so to find some stories that I had never heard about before I was like, wow, that's really cool. So time permitting on the podcast, I'll share that with you. And I say time permitting because I want to make sure that I get the emails that you send front and center. And I've picked out two particular ones this week that I want to share with you and spend some time with. I do have more, and I plan on getting to those emails in upcoming podcasts because I can't get to all of them every podcast, just because I like to spend time with you. Take time to write. I want to take time to respond, and I'm a much better speaker than I am a writer. I'm a atrocious writer. So, provided there's time at the end, I'll share with you this article that I got out of the BBC. If not, we'll save it for next week. But speaking of Depeche Mode, in the middle of my Star Wars fandom, I sat down to do the podcast today, and I just was reminded that they never really left my side in the middle of all of this. And that is kind of the special thing about this band, is that, you know, even though my fandom and my focus might have its attention drawn to another place, I think sometimes even I forget how much a part of my life Depeche Mode really is. Even when I'm not focused on them, they're right there. I mean, listening to it, obviously, in the car, driving to and from work and out doing stuff, and continue to listen to Spirit. I'm in that phase now where I've actually gone and listened to some other Depeche Mode stuff apart from Spirit, just because I've spent so much time with the record. But I still, thankfully, find myself gravitating back towards it. It hasn't lost any of its power, I guess is the right word. Sheen. It's still very fresh and new to me, and even though I've listened to it, who knows how many times right now. But what I wanted to talk about was just a quick story, and then we'll get into these into War Paint to end this movie trailer music before I get to your emails this week. But I used to play cards with my wife all the time. It's a game called Maui. I think it's Maou or something. It's not spelled like Hawaii Maui. It's a different kind of Maui, and we may even be pronouncing it wrong. But it's basically just sort of a fancier Go Fish with a regular deck of cards. We used to play this all the time when we first got married, and I used to play this game as a kid with my buddies. You know, long before the internet and before VHS was prominent, and we used to actually sit around and just drink and play cards all the time. So, for whatever reason, we got reminded of playing cards again. And so we decided to sit down and start playing. And we ended up teaching my 10-year-old Kyle how to play. It's pretty simple, but pretty simple game. No wagers or anything. So, over the course of the past couple weekends, we've been sitting down, and we kind of have a routine at night where, especially on the weekends, on Friday and Saturday night, we'll usually all watch a movie together, and then we'll kind of get off the TV for a while. Kyle will get ready for bed. My 14-year-old will get off the TV, and then once Kyle goes to bed pretty early, I'll go back on and watch another movie, a double feature or something. And in between sort of movie watching, before Kyle went to bed, we started playing this card game. And as I traditionally do, I don't drink during the week, but I drink on the weekends. I usually have a bottle of wine on Friday and Saturday night. It's just kind of my ritual. And I was enjoying a bottle of wine, and we sat down to play cards. And Kyle, my 10-year-old, says, "Hey, can you play Depeche Mode?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, sure." So, "Do you want to hear the new album?" He's like, yeah, I want to hear that Revolution song. And he must have, and I was kind of surprised by that, because I don't remember really playing it for him, and it must have been, we had spent some time driving around and we were listening to it, and it must have just stuck into his head. And so I threw the album into my Blu-ray player, and it's not 5.1, obviously, and I really like those 5.1 mixes. But I tossed it into the Blu-ray player, and I do have a 5.1 really nice surround sound system. And if you've listened to any albums through a DVD or a Blu-ray player with a really good stereo system, you're not getting a true surround sound. You're getting stereo, but the Dolby sort of divides the audio up for you, and it ends up creating like a really interesting mix. So I turned it on at a decent level, and it might have been one of the most enjoyable experiences so far listening to Spirit. on the big speakers and hearing this different sort of mix that my stereo was producing of the record. The really cool part about it, to be honest, was the fact that Kyle was really getting into it. He was really just enjoying listening to the record. But it was fun too because, not making a big deal about it, my wife likes Depeche Mode. And when we got married, she was a bigger Depeche Mode fan. Her fandom has waned, throughout the years, and just being married and becoming a mom, and everything that's attached to that. That's going to happen, so it's not a huge surprise. But we ended up going on the Exciter tour together to several shows, and so she likes them, but she just isn't into them like she used to be. But it was so cool to see her sort of unknowingly grooving out, just kind of going with the music and rolling with it. And I remember the second night he wanted me to put the album back in again, and during going backwards, you could tell that she was just getting into it. I don't think that she's going to end up listening to the album to any degree, but to me it does speak to the fact of just how good the music is. And she was a former fan. She hasn't really paid attention to any of the albums outside of Exciter. I'll play a little bit for her, but she doesn't get into it like she used to. But in a moment of just playing cards and chilling out, it just was so cool that here my 10-year-old is wanting to listen to Depeche Mode. And here's my wife, and you can tell she's just grooving to it. And, man, it was just one of those moments that, and again, I'm a believer that everything happens for a reason, but it was one of those Depeche Mode moments that will stick with me. And it was funny because as this continued of us playing cards throughout different evenings and listening to music, she wanted me to grab Violator because she loves Violator, and who doesn't? And she's like, hey, can you, because Kyle asked to hear Depeche Mode again. And she goes, hey, would you mind grabbing Violator for Mommy? And I'm like, sure, I'd be happy to. And that was cool, too, because I hadn't listened to the 5.1 of Violator in a long time. And, with my stereo system, it can handle the 5.1 mix of it. And those mixes are so unique. Some of the songs are fantastic. Some of them miss the mark. Violator is done really, really well. And again, listening to it on the big speakers and sharing in that moment with my family, again, just another example, another testament to the power of this band. And so I'm glad I had the opportunity to share that with you. And I'm glad I decided to do the podcast this week, because I hadn't remembered it until now. I sat down and went, oh my gosh, yeah, that absolutely totally happened. All right. Just as a quick programming note, as always, if you want to email me, and thanks to everybody who has, you can drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com, talkshownerd@gmail.com. That's also available in the notes of the podcast, depending on where you're listening to it from. So the promotion for Spirit has kicked back up. The band is doing, there's just some new information, opening bands, and also some new appearances. The band is going to be performing, and my Twitter closed down, so let me bring it back up here. The band is going to be performing on Monday, so this will be the 24th, on the Late Late Show with James Corden. Let me open the link here real quick, because I don't know what song they're playing. And you got to forgive me, I don't know if we've landed on a second single yet, have we? Let's see. Earlier this year, Depeche Mode performed on NBC's Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon. On the 24th, they'll be taking the stage on another U.S. television series. This comes out of headlineplanet.com. CBS confirms Depeche Mode for the night edition of The Late Late Show with James Corden. Following the band's performance, there'll be a discussion with people that we don't care about because they're not Depeche Mode. I was just looking to see if... No, they don't say what songs that they're performing. Interesting. I do wonder if we'll get, if we'll have an idea on what the next single will be. And as a matter of fact, you know what? Let me go ahead and let me do everybody a service here. So I decided to pop over to the Depeche-mode.com website, check out the forum, just to see if there was any information in here of what the second single would be. And a lot of times they're kind of buried inside of the posts. But so far, I'm not seeing anybody posting what the second single might be. So I guess the assumption would be they'll probably do Where's the Revolution. If they do a song apart from that, I would venture a guess that would probably give us a pretty good indication of what the next single would be. But I'm looking at the track list right now, and I'm not... I would be hesitant to go and even guess what the next single would be. The band has been so... I don't want to say cavalier, but certainly not picked over the course of the past few albums the songs that I would have picked for singles. If you're going to go the sort of the straight up single route expectation, I would have gone with So Much Love. That seems like the standard good song for a single. But, knowing the band, they'll end up choosing Eternal, right? So, so keep an eye on that Monday night. Another live performance. I'll certainly be I won't be staying up that late because I got to work the next day, but I'll certainly be recording it. The other piece of news that came out was the announcement that Warpaint will be the support act for the Global Spirit Tour in U.S. and Canada. For those that have not heard any of Warpaint, here is a sample.
You're a new song, you're a new song, baby, you're a new song to me. You're a new song, baby, you're a new song to me. I was so wrong to think that it was wrong for me. I want it.
I've heard this particular song, and this is the only one that I've heard by the band so far, Warpaint. But I've heard this song now a few times just in getting the podcast ready this week, and I kind of dig it. I'll tell you what. After the last tour with Crystal Castles, that's who I saw open up for, who I don't even think are around anymore. I'll take that as an opening act. I miss the opening acts that we had, and it's probably due. And I'll be honest, look, it's probably due to the fact that at the time I was following alternative music and the trends more closely than I certainly do now. But when you go back to Violator and you had Nights Are Ebb and Electronic opening up, for the Dodger Stadium shows. I mean, Nights Are Ebb is an opening act. You can't get any better than that. I thought that the opening act of the on the Songs of Faith and Devotion tour, I became a massive the fan after seeing them so many times on the devotional tour. And I also liked Poe quite a bit. I really got into Poe for a brief bit of time during the Exciter tour, but since then, the opening bands have just been a little lackluster. Certainly hadn't been showing up to any of the shows early to see them. In the last tour I did with Crystal Castles, and honestly, I was kind of disappointed in that. So it's nice to see something a little bit more mainstream as an opening band for Depeche Mode. I believe Algiers is who is opening up in Europe. I didn't pull any of their audio. Maybe I'll save it for next week. I was just kind of focusing on the U.S. and Canadian dates since it's closer to my hood. So maybe I'll do that next week. But and I definitely want to check out a little bit more of Warpaint. So watching movie trailers the other day, and I've been keeping an eye on this movie. But I've been watching the trailers for it because it looks pretty good. This new Charlize Theron movie, Atomic Blonde, which kind of looks like a female John Wick. Love John Wick. Didn't care for the second one very much. First one's amazing though. And the full length trailer came out, and really long trailer, by the way. The trailer feels like it's 5 minutes long. Starts off with New Order, and then you get about a minute into the trailer, and suddenly I'm watching this, and I go, oh, hey, wait a second.
David Persons, your contact.
Welcome to Berlin. I'm David. Don't shoot. I've got your shoe.
You're wrong, personal, Jesus.
It was me from the moment my feet touched the ground.
This was never part of the plan.
It was part of mine.
I've lost the target.
What do you know about this woman who's been following me?
You look like you need saving.
So you made contact with the French operative?
Obviously.
The clock is ticking, and everyone you get close to ends up dead.
Someone set me up. Someone from the inside. Now, this only ends one way. A bullet.
Ready for action. Reach out, touch, space. So follow me, I couldn't ship out the door. Reach out, touch, space. But there's nowhere to go, and there's no way to slow. If I knew what I knew in the past, I would have been like that on your ass. Reach out, reach out, reach out, reach out, touch, space.
Oh my God, I think I love you.
That's too bad.
Reach out, touch, space.
Now, as far as I know, and I did a little bit of digging, not a ton, mind you, but while I was on Facebook pulling those clips down, I haven't seen a full remix of that. Kanye West does a song that samples Personal Jesus, but it doesn't have, at least the one that I listened to, doesn't have all the vocals that had. I found a mashup that somebody did of Personal Jesus and the Kanye West song, like the one in the trailer, but it wasn't the one in the trailer, at least from what I could tell. I dug it. It works well in the context of the trailer itself, and I like kind of how powerful it is. But like with most Depeche Mode mashups, you know, it's not something I'm going to listen to all the time because I always sort of find that it strips away the essence of what the song is. I like some remixes. We've talked about this on previous podcasts. Not going to be my go-to. The only remix at the moment that I would probably say has replaced, at least for the time being, listening to the original version is the live version that they've been doing, and also was available as a remix, of A Pain That I'm Used To. I really, really dig that version. That reminds me a lot of how they ended up switching up in your room. And the remix that Butch Vig did. I mean, I really like that remix too. Still prefer the original one. But A Pain That I'm Used To was one where, all right, you know what? The band's doing it live. I dig this. I'll listen to this, and I really, really like it. Normally, though, when you go and you end up adding in the lyrics to it, it takes away from the song itself. But that remix is pretty cool. And if you haven't checked the trailer, I'll go watch it, because I'll watch it with all the action. It absolutely works. So let me share something with you, and this has been rattling around in my head for a little bit, and I haven't shared this with anybody. It's not anything major, but you are part of my community, right? We're all a part of the same Depeche Mode community. Listening to Spirit, and this actually happened on a bike ride that I did. I went on this long bike ride. The weather here in Minneapolis finally warmed up enough where I can go on this bike ride. And there's some amazing trails, and there's a big park near my house. It's got some just amazing trails on it. And I put my headphones in on a Saturday morning and listened to Spirit. And this idea came to me of some concept videos. And I have this. I'm a huge sci-fi fan. You heard me mention, my fascination with Star Wars at the beginning of the podcast. But I'm a big sci-fi fan, just in general, big movie fan. And Depeche Mode's music has been, is so cinematic in so many different ways that while I love a lot of what Anton Corbijn has done, I really feel like they've missed the mark in taking advantage of what it is that they can produce. On a visual level. And speaking of that, real quick, I failed to mention that The only other time I remember Depeche Mode being used in a trailer, the actual music, we had it used in the trailer for Ghost in the Shell, but that was another cover version of Enjoy the Silence. They actually used A Pain That I'm Used To in the trailer for A Sorcerer's Apprentice, the Sorcerer's Apprentice, in a really, really cool way. If you've never seen it before, go to YouTube, search for the trailer for the Sorcerer's Apprentice, and you'll in one of the trailers you'll hear A Pain That I'm Used To, and it works really, really well. So I've had this, listening to the album from start to finish, and thinking of the lyrical content, social commentary, a little bit. I came up with this sci-fi story, and I think it really started with Dave Gahan saying that "Cover Me" was a story song about a guy who travels to another planet and finds out that it's like what it is here, and that song conjured up images of what it can be like. But I actually have mentally laid out this sci-fi story that I envision with a handful of young people while still having the band involved in a certain way. But I imagine this as a story of young people, essentially astronauts in a future where the world is falling apart and they have to escape the planet because of what is going on. And not the entire album. I've picked a select number of songs, and for each of the songs, I have mentally mapped out this storyline of videos and this concept, using a majority of the songs on the album to tell the story of these three people having to escape the planet. And I'm thinking I may have to write my ideas down. I probably should. I don't know. I don't know what I would ever do with it. It's certainly nothing. What I envision is nothing that I could ever produce by any stretch of the imagination. But maybe there's somebody out there who can see it or hear it and envision what I'm trying to create, and maybe there's something there. I don't know. I do know that, we Depeche Mode fans are so inspired by the music, and it often, pushes and pulls us in different ways, and I found it so inspirational in different ways, and this is the first time I've listened to a Depeche Mode record where I actually envisioned this separate story that plays really, really well with the lyrics and the content of the lyrics and the music itself, that I just was thinking, you know what, I'll share it on the podcast. If somebody's interested in hearing it, maybe I'll jot it down on paper as an outline storyline. I'm not a good artist by any stretch, but I can doodle really well. The artwork you've seen from my Nerd World is essentially my ideas, and then conceptually somebody else went and did the artwork for me. So perhaps I'll do that. I wanted to share it with you because I haven't told anybody about this idea of these individuals who essentially represent the members of the band taking off from Earth because Earth is going through turmoil. Starting off with going backwards and watching from afar what's happening on the planet below, and then a series of events forces them to have to go further out into the galaxy, and actually using Dave's idea of what Cover Me was as that portion of the story. So you know what? I won't say that I won't. I say that I will. And at some point, I'll write all this down. And if anybody is interested in checking it out, I'll put it up online where somebody can go and look at it. And who knows what can come of it from there. But I appreciate you not only downloading the podcast, but allowing me a moment to sort of share in my idea. And it is all, again, part of Depeche Mode and what inspires us, and how the band reaches out to us, because when I listen to the album now, I continue to envision this story that I've created in my head and what it would be like if I were ever actually to see it come to fruition. All right, let's move on. So I'm looking at the clock, and it's pretty clear I'm not going to have time to get to my 9 wild Depeche Mode stories. We'll have to save it for next week's podcast. But I do want to get to the emails because I love hearing from you. And like I said, I've chosen 2 different emails that I wanted to share with you this week. And we'll start off with Shane. I'm going to assume it's Perry or Pari from Melbourne, Australia. Writes this. I know 100 people have probably asked you this already, but how come you haven't done a Depeche Mode podcast in a few weeks? I miss them, man. Dude, thank you. You have no idea how much that means to me. By the way, if you're stuck for ideas on what to talk about regarding the Mode, I have a few ideas about various things that have always fascinated me about this band. The main thing that fascinates me is how they've always been using backing tracks to help them do what they do live for almost 4 decades. But still to this day, there are countless detractors who despise them for it. My band, Goddess, proudly uses backing tracks. And we are not strictly electronic, but we need to use tracks in order to fully put across what we want to achieve. Strings, falsetto, harmonies, electronic flourishes in order to create a cinematic feel. As not every band wants to sound like Blink-182. So what's your opinion of bands that use backing tracks? Maybe you could put the question to your listeners. I think a lot of people assume that if you admit to using tracks, that somehow that means you're lip syncing, which is ridiculous. I'd love your thoughts, John. Look, I have no issue with it whatsoever. I tend to think of people that paint any band, I don't care who it is, any band into some sort of box, isn't doing themselves any service whatsoever. And I don't want to say disrespectful, but Dave Grohl of Foo Fighters, and this is something that I've always believed, but Dave Grohl of Foo Fighters always said, look, there's no guilty pleasures. Look, you like music or you don't like music. I like everything, for the most part, but I would never mock somebody for the music that they like. I've got a One Direction song, Perfect, sitting in my playlist, and I have no problem whatsoever admitting to people that I really dig that song. I may not like all or any other One Direction song, but that particular song I really, really enjoy. And I know that with the band early on when they came to America, and for those that have been following the band, you know that when they came here, people saw them as being sort of quirky and weird. And for whatever reason, there's been this bizarro stigma that stuck with the band for years. And it's really funny because we have a producer on our show. Her name is Samantha. She's 21 years old and isn't familiar at all with Depeche Mode and knows how big of a fan I am of the band. But it was kind of strange for her, and this plays into Shane what you were talking about. But it's strange for her to see me be such a big fan of a band that she is not aware of. And we traveled to Norway recently for a radio trip. We went to a military installation in Trondheim, which was an amazing experience, by the way. I made a whole Depeche Mode. I think I talked about it on the podcast, but I made a whole Depeche Mode playlist for that trip. But I remember we were staying in like these dorms on the base, and we all had separate rooms. We were all hanging out together. It was one of the last nights we were there. We went out and got a bunch of alcohol, and we're just drinking and hanging out. And she's a really amazing person, but she had been poking fun at me because of my Depeche Mode fandom, because it was just, we mock what we don't understand kind of thing, right? And I pulled up a video online in our hotel room of one of it was Everything Counts from the 101 tour. I'm just like, look at the crowd. She goes, I know. I said, no, you don't know. And I wasn't digging on her at all. I was just trying to show her. I go, look, this band is huge and has been for a long, long time. And it's fascinating to me that they don't get the level of respect that they should for being as successful and huge and meaningful as they are. Obviously people like you and me, we put them up there with the Beatles. And when for some people, or the Stones, I certainly put them in that category. They're amazing. They're different and unique. And a lot of times, we know this, especially in the world that we live in, people tend to shy away from things that are different and unique. They don't understand it, and so it's foreign to them, and it scares them. And I have no problem with any band using electronics, backing tapes or otherwise, to achieve the goals that they are trying to achieve in the music that they are trying to make. It's all part of the creative process. I watched a video yesterday, and it cracked me up. It was this guy who was on a keyboard and said that every Chainsmokers song sounds like this. And he basically did did the scale on a keyboard and made up lyrics that make it sound like every Chainsmokers song. And he was kind of mocking the band. And I'm watching this, and it was funny. Don't misunderstand, because they've done this for Nine Inch Nails. There's a great Nine Inch Nails one out there that every Nine Inch Nails song sounds like this, and it's a guy that does this parody. It's really, really funny. But what's funny about it to me, and what I find, I don't know if it's ironic, but what I find interesting is that, you know what? You try to be as successful as Trent Reznor. You go and record a song like the Chainsmokers and see if it impacts as many people as what the Chainsmokers does. Now, I'm not a huge Chainsmokers fan, but I like two of their songs, right? You go do that. You know, the creative process is the creative process, regardless of how you get there. You know, to me, is the band satisfied and happy with what they created? And are people reacting to it and reaching out to it? And even if you just reach one person, that's enough. So for anybody to sit back and ever mock the band for using backing tapes, or anybody for that matter, or keyboards, or a keytar, right, or a banjo, whatever, man. It doesn't have to float your boat. It just has to float maybe someone's boat. Even if the only boat that it floats is the person that created it. When I made this podcast, I didn't know if anybody was going to listen to it. I didn't know if anybody would like it or get into it. But I wanted to do it for me because I'm a Depeche Mode fan. And it's a great outlet for me to talk about this band that I've loved for years, that really have only expressed myself by just belting out trying to do my best Dave Gahan and Martin Gore impersonation in my car when I'm driving down the road. So yeah, I think it is ridiculous that anybody would go and mock the band for using backing tapes or anything else. And for anybody to ever give Depeche Mode a hard time, you know, that's just the stupidest thing ever. Their success speaks for themselves. I mean, how many other 80s bands are there out there that are still pumping out great music to this day that have been around as long as this band that you and I love? And still has that emotional impact. It may not be as big as it used to be. And, you know, during the Violator era, that trilogy, right? I got to put Songs of Faith and Devotion in there too, but the music for me, that was the core. Music for the Masses, Violator, Songs of Faith and Devotion. That whole series of years in the late 80s, early 90s in my life, man, it was almost like a drug you're always chasing when it comes to this band. I can listen to, when I hear Electronic's first record, I don't hear electronic. I don't. I hear the music, but you know what I hear? It's the crowd at Dodger Stadium. Am I reminded of New Order? No. I'm reminded of Depeche Mode. Because I remember listening to that record in my dad's 71 Volkswagen bus with my friends and their girlfriends piled into it, driving down to Dodger Stadium, listening to that record because we knew that cassette tape in my dad's Volkswagen bus, driving to Dodger Stadium because we knew they were the opening band. That's what it immediately takes me to. When I hear Violator, does the same thing. If I see any of the backing videos, does the same thing. When I see the video for World in My Eyes with the concert footage, and I watch it, and I can tell what songs they use to piece together the video, which still makes me laugh. It's really cleverly made, but if you've watched the World in My Eyes video, if you went to the devotional tour, you know that there's like 5 or 6 different songs that they used to create that. I think only the beginning part of that video is actually Dave singing World in My Eyes. The rest of it, it's just they piece it together to make it sound like that he's singing World in My Eyes, but it's through different parts of the entire concert. I love the video for that reason, because it really is kind of a great combination of that particular concert in a handful of minutes for World in My Eyes. But when we talk about and we judge the records, and I'm really getting off here, and Shane, I'm going to have to spend the rest of the next podcast and the other email because I've done it again and run out of time. But if you were a part of it then, and I think it still has an effect in different ways for people now. It really seems like Ultra had this kind of impact for a lot of people. But that era of Music for the Masses, Violator, and Songs of Faith and Devotion, it was so magical and special. It consumed everything during those years. And this was before you really had the opportunity to, there weren't as many things of interest and popularity pulling at you to divide up your attention. And I know that with every Depeche Mode album, at least for me, there's always this, is this album going to capture that? And when I've talked about Spirit was is honestly the closest record since Songs of Faith and Devotion that's brought me back to that. I love the other albums in different ways, but Spirit was the first, and it's really special to me for that reason. And we'll see if it continues to resonate that way. But it was the first record in a long time that really was new, that brought back a bit of that magic that I never really got in the albums afterwards. And that's not to take away from Ultra or Exciter or Playing the Angel or anything. That is just to say that those moments in time over those 3 records and those 3 concerts in those years with Depeche Mode, because we all went through a lot. When you think about, for those that were following the band the way that I was and that way that you potentially were, those were a lot of really tumultuous years, especially with the Songs of Faith and Devotion tour. When Dave went through all of his problems after that, I mean, that was still all a part of that. But those were really magical Depeche Mode years that I will never, ever, ever forget. And those bring such warm feelings to my heart. And they're so special to me. And it's what has kept me a fan for so many years, a piece of it, along with everything else that the band has done. And again, just to recap, looking at, I have the Spirit sitting right here in front of me. I just kind of popped it up on my desk while I was doing the podcast today. And, Spirit was the first album that really, again, sort of brought me back to that special and uniqueness. I really need to go get to the tickets for this tour. I don't know what I'm thinking. Well, I kind of wiped out there at the end. Sorry about that. And Shane, you've got a whole other question here that I didn't get to, not to mention the email and the article I didn't get to either. So I need to do a better job of mapping out my podcast to make sure that I can cover everything I want to cover. Thankfully, however, there's another week and another 45 minutes that I can spend talking about Depeche Mode. And I just hope that you will join me once again next week when I do that. Thank you so much for checking out the podcast. Sorry I'm a couple weeks late, guys. Thank you so much for the emails. I hope you enjoyed this one once again as much as I enjoyed recording it. Drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com. You can find the podcast not only on YouTube, but also on Stitcher, on Spreaker, Podbean, and iTunes. Tell your friends. Send me your stories. I'll get to them on the podcast eventually. Have yourself a fantastic week, and I'll talk to you again next week. Bye.
My Nerd World.